All right, this is going over the TokenPass AP Computer Science for Response question, Part A. And they have a whole big description of this game. Basically, you've got like tokens on a board, and then you pick them up and place them in the array spot, one to the right, and keep going till the end. If you hit the end, you go back to 0 and keep placing the tokens till you run out of them. Um, and so they describe the game here. Hopefully you had a chance to read this and look this over before you've seen this video. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because that's actually part B. Part A, we just have to set up the board. And so what the board looks like, it's an array of ints, one spot for each player. So this is a player 4 and there's spots 0 to 3. And then you have to put a random amount of tokens in each spot. So for the part A, we just have to do this constructor. Okay, and so what happens with constructor normally is you just set the two instance variables. So we have the board here, but we have to initialize it, right, with spots equal 1 for each player. Then we have to loop through it and populate it with a random number 1 to 10. And then finally, we have to set the current player to be one of these indexes, 0 to 3, right? So if there's 4 players, it's 0 to 3. If there's 8 players, it's 0 to 7. Right, so we have to initialize both the current player and the board in our constructor in part A. The number of players is different each time, so that's represented by this player count. All right, so basically the first thing I want to do is initialize the board, right? And so to do that, I'm just going to say this board variable is equal to a new int array. All right, and we have to specify with the int array, you have to specify how many spaces. And so the number of spaces is going to be equal to the number of players. So that's just going to be the player count variable, right? If there was, again, 4 players, you'd have 4 spots, 0 to 3. All right, so that's the first part. This is kind of a visual of it, right? So we created the array with 4 spots. They're all 0 currently. Now we need to loop through and populate them with a random number. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is loop through the indexes 0 up to less than the length of the board and populate that spot. Okay, so we're going to do for loop int I equals 0. I is less than board dot length plus plus I. All right, so that'll loop 0 to 3 if the board is 4 long. All right, and I'm going to set board position I to be a new random number. Okay, so the trick is, how do I get this random number? It has to be 1 to 10. Right, so in real coding, I would definitely write a method here. All right. Okay, so I'm not going to do a method here just because on the AP test, most of the questions are concise enough, short enough so that you don't need a bunch of methods, right? But if you wanted to write one here, you could to get the random number. But I'll just do it the regular way. Okay, so math.random is a double, which is 0 to 0.99999. All right, and so if I want to go 1 to 10, it might make sense to multiply that by 10 right at the start. So I'm going to do my first step, which is just to do 10 times math.random. So that'll actually be 0 to, if I shift these over, that'll be 0 to 9.99999. Okay, and then I can truncate that. So step 2, I'm going to truncate that, turn that into an int. So that'll chop off the end, so that'll be 0 to 9. Right, chops off the end of it, truncates it. 9.9999 would become 9. Okay, and then to get to 1 to 10, I just have to increase by 1. So if I go plus plus step 1, that'll increase these bounds. Instead of being 0 to 9, now it'll be 1 to 10. All right, and then now I have my new random number, and then I just set it like that. Oops, I can't call it step. Sorry, this should be step 2. That's what I want to increase by 1, and then set that to be step 2. So step 2 is my int. That was 0 to 9. Now it's 1 to 10, and now I set it to that spot on the board. And again, this I would definitely just do in a method and have it return an int, right? So I don't know. Especially too because we need another random number to set the current player to. So it probably makes sense to have a method where you would specify the bounds. All right, so that should be it for initializing the board. So now the board has random numbers 1 to 10. All right, but then we still have to set the current player, and the current player is not just going to be 0. It's going to be a random number between 0 and the number of players. Right? So it's real similar to these steps, except I don't think we have to do the plus plus 1 part. Right? So instead of multiplying by 10, I want to multiply by how many players I have. So imagine that there's 4 players, then it would be 4 times math.random, and that would be 0 to 3.99999. And then when we truncate, that'd be 0 to 3, which would be perfect because that's our indexes. Right? Our current player, even though if there's 4 players, we want the index to be 0 to 3. Okay, so I'm going to do these same steps, all right, pretty much for when I set the current player. So I'm going to do this, except instead of 10 here, it's going to be how many players I have. So that's just player count again. That's the variable that came in called player count. All right, and then again, I do need to turn it into an int. So I can use these same names, I guess, because these variables only have scope inside the for loop. So I might just do all this in one step, though. I do have to turn it into an int. So it'd be like 0 to 3 or whatever. But I'm going to set the current player right here. So I'm just going to say current player, which is this variable up here, the global variable. And I'm just setting it to be truncate whatever I got from step 1 there. All right, and that'll set the current player. So we set the board, right? We initialized it, give it some values here, and then set the current player there. Right? So basically we've initialized our board and our game is ready to start. Right? So that's all you had to do in part A was initialize it. All right. Hope that helps.